What's up, guys? Welcome back to class. This is the Problem Academy. And today we're going to talk about a few things that happened over the weekend. Nothing major, changes in the war with Iran, but, there was the usual back and forth. Now it seems like over Twitter, which is how the world operates these days. But, start off with, I guess, Iran pretty much called Trump's bluff yet again. They've just continually done so throughout this war, and today's no different. J.D. Vance, Steve Witkoff, and Jared Kushner were supposed to leave for Islamabad today, in the early afternoon. But last minute, their plans got changed. Their destinations got rerouted to D.C. for an emergency meeting that Trump had called after Iran said they weren't sending a delegation there. So, we'll see what comes out of that. A few hours after that meeting, Trump announced that he's going to extend the ceasefire. But really, what does that mean, and like where we stand? We'll kind of get into what happened over the weekend and how we got to another extension. But Friday night, for whatever reason, Trump came out and announced that Iran agreed to all of his demands, that they're going to give us all of their enriched uranium, that they're going to open up the strait for good. Basically, they're going to give us the world, everything that we wanted. And all we were giving them was they were allowed to enrich, I think it was like less than 2% for medical purposes. I don't know why he announced that, where it even came from, because almost immediately afterwards, Iran came out and said, we never even spoke to Trump. We never even had any talks about this. We reject everything in that. And it seems like the only thing that they did maybe speak about was opening up the strait, ending the blockades from both sides. Because it was announced that the blockade was lifted, the strait was open. And then within, I think 2 hours, it was closed again. A few ships got through, but that's about it. Just very coincidentally, as soon as the straits opened up, the price of crude oil dropped, like drastically. And coincidentally, there were about 20 minutes before the announcement of the strait opening up, there was $760 million worth of shorts on crude oil. And what a short is when like you think that a stock is going to fall, you'll go to somebody and say, hey, I want to borrow, 10 of your shares of, say, Apple. And then I'll pay you for them, later on. So you're betting on the stock dropping so that when you do pay them, it's worth a lot less. So that's what they did with the oil 20 minutes before the announcement. Just some really, really good, smart people that just saw it magically happening within that time frame. Definitely no insider trading or corruption or anything like that, no. But so by Saturday morning, everything was closed. We were right back to where we were before that announcement on Friday night. You had Trump doing his thing again with, I'm going to destroy Iran if they don't, agree to the ceasefire by the time it ends, which I think it's supposed to end tomorrow, if I remember correctly. But, I'm going to destroy the whole country again. His whole bloviating response to any type of pushback to him. But today, like I said, he said he's going to extend the ceasefire, claim because the leadership in Iran is fractured, so they can't make a deal because both sides don't know what they're doing there. Excuse me. Which I guess it's somewhat true, but I mean, you did that. Like, that's your fault. Anyway, but again, Iran came out and said that they don't agree to an extension of the ceasefire. They came out a few hours later, said that. I'm sure that they're gonna agree to the ceasefire, like we talked about, last week or 2 weeks ago. They've just been a reciprocal response to everything. They don't strike things unless they're struck there. So anytime the U.S. stops, Iran stops. We also had some good old-fashioned piracy going on. I think Sunday morning, the U.S. Navy fired on a Iranian ship and then boarded it. Supposedly, it was carrying materials to build missiles coming in from China, but China denies that, and it's not really clear what was on that ship. But yeah, so we struck an Iranian ship and boarded it, took it, and then today, an Iranian oil tanker was boarded and seized in the Indian Ocean. I think in the Bay of Bengal. But so we're kind of just turning into pirates. Oh, again, so that's one of the reasons that Iran cited for not having a representative in Islamabad. They're saying that the U.S. is just violating the ceasefire every single day, and there's no point in peace talks if we're just going to continually violate them. Hopefully, supposedly there's chance for the delegation from the United States to leave tomorrow, and they'll have talks Thursday. The Prime Minister of Pakistan is really pushing for it, and a lot of our allies in the region are. Some of them have taken a harder line on it, but they'll do as we say. A report did come out from I believe the Pentagon put it out, that despite what he says, that we completely obliterated all their military capacity, and you hear the reports, their missiles are spent. Iran still has about 70% of their missile supply ready to go, and 60% of their launchers still remain usable, intact, and ready to go. So, despite all the boasting and bragging, and we've won this war 172 times in the last month, we are still up against sizable, retaliation with Iran if it does get back into more of a hot war. Another point of contention is, as always, it's the Israel-Lebanon war. They're in what's, again, is a ceasefire, but they're striking every day and killing people every day, and then Hezbollah is retaliating right back, and so it's more of a simmer than a boil, but it's still a pretty hot conflict right now. But they're actually supposed to have another round of negotiations Thursday in the United States. What will come of that, we'll see. But Israel is, they basically said that they have a yellow line, like where for Lebanon not to cross into, kind of like how they have in Gaza now. And they're basically talking like that yellow line is now theirs. Up until that point, it's now going to be part of Israel. They've conquered it, whatever. It's actually, they have one of the biggest oil fields in, which was Lebanon. Now it's under their control. So we'll see how much that they'll stick to that and where that goes. But I don't doubt that they're going to try for it. They took land in Syria as soon as Assad fell. They've never stopped encroaching into the West Bank, and that's ultimately their goal. It's the Greater Israel Project. They want to control, you know, up through Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, parts of Saudi Arabia, basically like everything that God promised to them in the Torah. Coincidentally, that's what the United States ambassador to Israel told Tucker would be fine if they took it. But a few other things happening are again, our allies in the region have grown kind of tired of us. They were thriving. Middle East was, the Gulf especially, was thriving the past few years. Dubai, uh, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, all these places were blowing up. They're having tourists, this and that. A lot of Westerners, a lot of Americans even are going there, moving there even. Life in the Gulf was really good. But that also kind of depended on the idea that the United States having bases there meant that they would be protected and insulated from any kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Destabilization of the region. Doesn't seem like it has, and now one of the top columnists or something like that in the UAE came out and said that United States bases in its country are a liability. They should get rid of them. But there's some pushback from the other side. But that's kind of how the sentiment is growing. I think Kuwait today or yesterday announced force majeure on their oil contracts, which is basically like, I have a contract with you, you're going to supply me this much, and force majeure means that there's like outstanding, extraordinary circumstances that make you incapable of supplying me with what we're contracted for. And I have no basic legal recourse for that because, there's nothing, it's outside of your control. It's not nothing that you did. It's, again, a global war where Iran is sending missiles at Kuwaiti oil refineries. It has nothing to do with Kuwait, and Kuwait shouldn't be held responsible. A few other countries have done that already. I think Qatar did with their natural gas and stuff like that. I think actually I read something like $160 billion have been wiped out of the UAE like stock exchange. Like, just nobody's traveling. Their money is on oil, tourism, and they do a lot of like AI, like logistics and stuff like that. And when you have a high chance of a missile landing on you, you're not going there for tourism. You're not trying to build these AI server houses. You're not, Straits closed, so they're not getting their oil money. But so we're really hurting our allies there, and we'll see how this relationship is going forward. I think it'll still, continue pretty much the same way, but it's not going to be like a happy dog, doing tricks for you anymore. It's going to kind of be like the dog doesn't want to get beat, so he's going to do it. Um, also, apparently, Iraq has been leaderless for about 6 months now. I was just reading that earlier. They had their elections in parliament, and then they wanted to put this one guy up as prime minister, who the United States rejected. They're basically our vassal still. Like all of their money they make from oil in Iraq legally has to be put into the Federal Reserve in New York. and then we literally fly cash to Iraq, to the government, when they ask for some of their money back, like for this program or that. But then we just decide, like, so that's what we're doing. We don't like the two candidates that they have right now because we think they're too friendly with Iran, and we're threatening of withholding all of that money from them. So basically holding them hostage. Um, the one guy who actually won was the prime minister when ISIS took over. Well, took over like a third of the country. So that's a little bit of a foreboding. um, but we'll see. I mean, the peace deal really, like, there's three major points. Like in the beginning, you had Marco Rubio and all these people talking about the missiles. The ballistic missile program in Iran needs to be ended. That was like our red line right leading up to the war. We haven't really heard anything about that since, because literally Iran gives up their ballistic missile programs. What do they have? That's never going to happen. So at least that's been pushed out of there. But it's enrichment. It's, does Iran have the right to enrich uranium? Which, according to international law and all of these treaties, they signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So that means that they are allowed to enrich for civilian purposes. Legally speaking, they are in the right here with that. So, we're trying to say that we're not allowing any enrichment. Iran is saying that they need enrichment. So that's kind of going to be a sticking point. Another one is Iran is kind of claiming control of the Strait of Hormuz now in perpetuity. I think they've been either discussing, doing tolls. I don't know if they're permanent tolls or, temporary to pay for rebuilding after all the damage that we caused there, or just, having it recognized as under the control of Iran, which, kind of makes sense for them, since it's almost like an alternative to a nuclear deterrent. Like, we don't go into North Korea and take out Kim Jong-un because they have nukes. That kind of keeps us, like, yelling at them from across the street, like, hey, don't do that. But, like, we're really not going to invade there, because the chance of a nuclear weapon being used is not zero. Same thing when Stalin got the nuclear bomb, and Mao in China, Pakistan, all these places that get the nuke. Actually, it was probably like 15 years ago, maybe something like that. I read it, like, Vladimir Putin, the president in Russia, wrote like this whole op-ed, and I forget what paper it was in the United States, but about why Iran is almost not right in the sense, but like logical to pursue a nuclear weapon. This was way before the JCPOA or anything like that. But it was, and he pointed to all these examples. You look at aggression from the West, from America, we tend to, be a lot easier on the people that have nuclear weapons. I might have been right after Gaddafi was overthrown in Libya, actually, because Gaddafi had signed a deal to hand over all of his nuclear weapon. He got rid of his enrichment program. And then, a decade or so later, as Hillary Clinton said, we came, we saw, he died. Sodomized to death by a bayonet. So Iran looks at that like, or the rest of the world looks at that. But the control of the Strait of Hormuz is almost like an alternative to that. To where, like, yeah, if anybody does anything, we're just going to shut down the most vital water passage in the world. So I think it might, be like no tolls. If I could predict, it's going to say no tolls, but okay, Iran has territorial claim over the Strait of Hormuz, but agrees to, never charge a toll or shut it down or whatever. So it's going to be kind of in a name only. And the last thing is their support for Hezbollah and their other proxies throughout the region. There's all these Shiite militias in all these different areas that, nominally they're kind of under Iran's umbrella of influence, let's say. I don't know how much uh, support they have, like financially and like weapons wise, but they all kind of, that's the big brother up there, and they all, you know, they'll do as Iran says mostly. You know, they are independent, and they would, if Iran was doing something to actually harm them, they won't listen. But you know, um, but we'll see how it goes. That's pretty much it. But we're slowly inching towards a new deal. Uh, I doubt we're anywhere close to it. What I think, you know, Iran has been pretty uh, Machiavellian almost. They're playing the long game, and I think that's what they're going to do with these peace talks. I think this ceasefire and this kind of stalemate is going to hold up through the end of this year. They know our politics and how much of a mess they are and how fractured we are as a country. They're not ignorant of that fact. And I think it's pretty obvious. Democrats are just going to absolutely wipe the floor with the Republicans in these midterms. I wouldn't be surprised if Democrats got a super majority in both the House and the Senate. Maybe not the House, because that's more so very independent, little pockets. But the Senate, they might get enough to not even have to worry about a filibuster. And if they do, they're going to get rid of the filibuster completely, and it's going to be bad. The Democrats since 2008 have been terrible for this country. Like, all the worst things come from Democrats, really. The woke, the cancel culture, the pushing the trans on kids, all of this stuff. Like, this all came from Democrats. They're trying to destroy the filibuster. They wanted to pack the Supreme Court. They want to destroy basically the structure of America, and they're going to get that power soon. So hopefully, they kind of, the real crazy part of it is gone. Like we were talking about in my last episode. Hopefully those more America First forces kind of rise to the top and win out on these elections. But if the past, I don't know, 18 years have been any sort of indicator, they're really going to do everything they can for retribution, and because they're mad about Trump. They thought Trump and Republicans were basically dead and buried, and they came back, with a vengeance. But what you're going to see is immediate impeachment hearings. And like I said, if they win it they win like a 60%, 60 senators in the Senate, they'll get a conviction now too and actually remove Trump from office. I think I saw Polymarket yesterday had Trump at a 70% chance of being impeached again. So, once that happens, he's just going to be bogged down with impeachment hearings and subpoenas and investigations. And so he's going to be in a much weaker position, Trump is. So I believe that Iran is going to try to wait that out. And, as that deadline approaches, Trump knows the same. And I think he's going to get more and more either unstable or more amenable. Well, we'll see. They're kind of like taking a more Eastern style approach. like or even a Fabian style, where you know what, they're not going to try to fight us on the battlefield. They're not going to last on the battlefield with us, but they can wait us out. Make our life hell with our allies and choking off the oil supply of the world. I really think that they kind of just allowing these little lifts to kind of just, it's almost like the world knows that we kind of started this. So like nobody's really angry at Iran for closing the strait. That's the second order of events. Us starting the war was the first. So now, the world is kind of mad at us. You look at our NATO allies not letting us use our bases and stuff. But if Iran holds it too long closed and makes life around the world really bad from it, sentiment's going to kind of turn against them. Like it doesn't matter at that point anymore if we did it. Now it's Iran doing it to them. So I think they let like these pressure valves off. Um, you know, so I think they're just going to wait up to the end of the year, wait for all these subpoenas and hearings and investigations and just the bottleneck of government, because anything Trump's going to try to do, Democrats are going to try to stop right away. Everything's going to get put right to the courts immediately. So he's on a time frame. Israel's on a strict deadline as well. Now, this is the most support that they'll ever receive again from the administration of the United States. So we'll see. Trump's going to get pressure from that side. He's going to have pressure of his own, impeachment and all that. And he's going to have the pressure of wanting to say that he won this war and got us in this better deal than Obama, like he did, like I said in the beginning. This is all about doing a better deal than Obama did with the JCPOA. It's all for his ego. All these, hundreds of dead kids and civilians in Iran, all for his ego. Our dead troops and our casualties are injured and stuff. That's all for his ego. This was nothing more but a war for a foreign nation and Trump's ego. And unfortunately, we get stuck in the middle. Well, that's it for class, everybody. You're all dismissed. Have a good day.